Right now I'm signed in with Firebase using Google authentication. And if I click sign out, it signs me out because what determines whether I'm signed in or not is simply whether there is a user in state. And the sign out button removes it from state, removes it from local storage, so I'm signed out. But I haven't actually signed out from Firebase. I never did anything to undo my sign in here. So if you keep reading in the docs, sooner or later you'll see something about actually signing out. Here we go, Firebase auth sign out. Seems like we probably ought to do that too, right? So that happens in app. Let's close some of these that we're not using. So in app, sign out, we call this.setState, local storage remove item, etc. We should probably also call sign out on Firebase auth. So let's see, we're not importing anything from base just yet. So let's import auth, lowercase a, from /base. Because auth, remember that we exported from base, is firebase.auth, open close parens. So then in sign out, we can actually call base.signout, and then we'll actually be signed out. Not base, sorry, auth. Then we'll actually be signed out from Firebase. Otherwise, we're not actually signed out. So it'd be nice if there were an, it just seems like there's a better way to handle this flow. Because if we're not signed out, it seems like it should figure out that we're not signed out, even if we've removed it from local storage. If we're still signed in with Google on this domain, it seems like we should stay signed in. So there is another way that we could be doing some of this. Looking in the docs here along the side, this is all in the authentication section on Firebase's docs. Scroll down far enough, you'll see auth state persistence. So that's what we're doing with local storage. We're persisting the state of our authentication across page reloads. So we can refresh the page and we stay signed in because we put it there. One way to do this, though, I think it's on this in this section. I can never remember where in the documentation this is. I do this every time. Where is this? Where in the documentation is this? Gosh dang it. Yeah, I see it. I see it there on. Oh, manage users. That's right. That's right. Let's try to actually find it in the docs without Google. Okay. Oh, manage users. Let's look at that section of the documentation. Get the currently signed in user. That seems useful. Firebase auth on auth state changed. This is the recommended way to get the current user. So we're getting the current user by actually calling this handle auth function that we wrote. But that's the hard way. We don't have to do that. We could just call sign in with pop-up and not do anything with that promise. Not call anything when that finishes from sign in. I'm going to get rid of handle change and handle submit or comment them out since I commented out my form. So I just call auth.signin with pop-up. And then in app, I can just look for the state of authentication to change. Anybody do this? Okay. So on auth state changed. We want to start listening for this pretty much right away. Here's one problem that this could potentially solve. If we're logged in here, and then we open up another window and we log out, it's not gonna change our other window, but this will. This will actually notice when we've actually signed out. So what we could do, we're not doing anything on component did mount in app just yet. Let's add component did mount here. So as soon as the app component exists, as soon as it's rendered to the page for the first time, we will just start listening for the auth state to change. Auth.on auth state changed. And it looks like it expects you to pass in a function. Now, as always, when we pass in a callback like this, we're going to use an arrow function, not the keyword function, because this, right? Our binding of this gets goofed up if we don't. So we want an arrow function. But in this case, looks like it's going to get an argument, user. So our arrow function actually gets a user object as its argument. That's really convenient. And in the example here, it says if user, user signed in, else no one is signed in. If user, user is signed in, else user is signed out. So again, what this is doing, as soon as the app component mounts, it's going to start listening for our authentication status to change. A sign in is a change, a sign out is a change. And anytime it changes, it's going to run this function right here. And it's going to know whether there's a user or not. If there's not a user, then we should sign out. Because remember, this represents a change. This only gets called if the auth state changed. If we went from signed in to sign out, to signed out. So we can auto detect that and then just call, well, whatever should happen when the user signs out. So right now, sign out calls auth.signout and it does some cleanup. But it seems like these things, we have one called handle auth. How about we add one called handle unauth? Handle unauth. Maybe it's an awkward name, but that's the stuff that should happen after you log out. After you log out, you should clear out the user from state and remove it from local storage. Actually signing out, that's just auth.signout. See what I mean? This is sign out, this is after sign out. If you wanted to name it after sign out instead of handle unauth, that's fine. So if the user sign out, I want to call this.handle unauth. If the user signed in, I want to call handle auth. And handle auth is written to expect a user object. Well, what do you know? Our callback has a user object right there. How convenient. So I changed sign in so that it no longer even calls handle auth. I don't even need to pass that down to sign in anymore. So sign in no longer even receives handle auth. When I click the sign in with Google button, all that happens is I call sign in with pop-up. I don't do anything after it finishes. But in app.js, I'll be listening for any change to the auth state. And if it changes, it'll call this function right here. And if there's a user present, it'll sign me in. If there's not, it'll sign me out. So what handle auth will receive is no longer the user object that we built, but the user object from Firebase. So I'll make a variable, I'll call this auth user. And I'll still build a little user object out of that because we wanted only certain properties out of there. There's a whole bunch of properties on that thing. So I'll still do display name, auth user, dot display name. I'll put UID first, it's the important one. OAuth user dot UID. Email, OAuth user dot email. And photo URL, I like it lowercase like that. OAuth user dot photo URL. So do you see what's happening? This will just automatically get run whenever my status as a signed in or signed out person changes. So let's see what happens. I sign out. Here I am. Sign in. Let's sign in as this version of me. And it still refreshed, took me automatically into main, because handle auth, even though it's not getting called from sign in anymore, gets called automatically because the auth state changed and I was listening for it. And it ran this callback, and it said, if there was a user, heck yes, there's a user, call handle auth, which updated state, which means that my render function here checked whether I was signed in, determined I was, and rendered main. And now when I sign out, it just calls off that sign out. Then this callback runs and says, there's not a user anymore, call handle on auth. And that's what removes it from state and removes it from local storage. Sign out. There we go. Let's check this out. Let's open this app in another window as well. Let's sign in one of these windows. And now I'm signed in both. Sign out from one of them. Signed out in both. Because they're both waiting for that authentication status to change. So as soon as that changes in Firebase, it's going to pick it up. Yeah. Yeah, then you've got two totally different sessions going, right? Yeah. Yep, because they have a whole different conversation going with Firebase. Yep. So it stays signed in the other one because it really is still signed in. But if we hadn't done this on-off state change thing, we could appear to be signed in when we really weren't. Which doesn't matter so much when your database is configured to allow absolutely everybody read-write access. We should have changed our database rules before we did this to make a point. Rats. Oh well. So let's go ahead and commit what we just did. Handle authentication state changes.